Hi, folks. Welcome to It Matters Radio. I'm Ken Weene, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Monica Brinkman.
Hello, folks.
A very special guest, Patrick Gabridge, who is, well, you may remember him having been on the show before. Patrick is an author and a playwright, and he shares two passions with Monica and myself: theater and history. And Patrick, you write well, not all your plays, but a lot of your plays are rather unusual in that they are site-specific.
That's right. Yep. A lot of my work is geared for very specific places and is often commissioned. So I have a theater company called Plays in Place that specializes in creating site-specific plays in partnership with museums and historic sites. So one of our plays was two series of plays set at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So we had two sets of 5 plays that were, one set was around the natural world, one set was around American history and identity through the lens of Mount Auburn. And so people would go from place to place to place and see all the different plays. There were 5 plays in each set.
Yeah, I've been reading some of those actually this week, and I really enjoyed them a lot partly because I could identify. I'm not buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery, but I was born at Mount Auburn Hospital, which of course is right
steps away.
Yeah. And,
yeah, I find it really interesting that you are actually writing plays for, that are based on history. And because I actually belonged to a historical society for quite a long time, and we would stage things in graveyards, and we would become historical figures, but you do much more than that.
Right, it's far more than just kind of a reenactment or a dramatization. I mean, these are actually creating new works of art that are really taking advantage of the places where we're staging them, and so really fully inhabiting this place and bringing life to both the places and the people that are there. Like a new project that I'm working on right now, I've been working on for a few months, is a one-act play that's about the Roosevelts and the people who worked for them, that will be staged in their summer cottage on Campobello Island in New Brunswick, Canada. And so it'll actually take place in the living room of that cottage. We probably fit about 40 people in there. And so that's been and it's through the lens of the housekeepers who work there. And there's multiple generations in one family who worked at the cottage and with the Roosevelts. And so it was going to be staged this August, but I think that'll end up, because of the pandemic, we'll end up doing it next summer. But I'm super excited about that.
Oh yeah, I would love to see something like that. So they're
actually
hold the play? I'm sorry, Ken.
One of my favorite movies of all time was Sunrise at Campobello.
Yep.
And one of my favorite personal camping trip of all time was to Campobello Island.
Oh wow! So you've been there and.
Yes, we were there in August, and I have to tell you, lying out on we slept out, and it was a beautiful night, so we didn't need the tents. Looking up, and it was a meteorite shower going on. Wow. It was one of the most spectacular nights, epic in my life. So I have always felt a real connection to. So maybe if next summer, well, we'll see. Maybe I'll travel east.
I am so excited for it, and it's funny because I've been out there for a couple research trips, but only in the winter time. So I haven't even. I was going to get to go out there for a few weeks while we were going to be working on the play this summer, but now I'll have to wait. The border's closed. So when it reopens, though, I look forward to getting back there and seeing it in the summertime. But I think it'll be. Yeah, I think it really looks at issues of class and privilege, but about how people are sharing relationships. And it's about the Roosevelts as well. It's about how they're really intriguing people. And a lot of it is around the 1921, which is covered by Sunrise at Campobello, but with a different take on it for sure. And obviously not, that's all Sunrise at Campobello was about, is at that time. And this is a little more longitudinal look about the cottage.
More specific, yeah.
It is very specific. And again, like it takes place in the cottage. Though
the lead
Sunrise.
What's
that?
Who's the lead character?
It's interesting. There are three. The cast is three women to play everybody, including FDR and Louis Howe.
Wow.
And so Eleanor is one of the main characters, but Anna McGowan, who is a housekeeper for the Roosevelts for about 40 years, is kind of one of the others. And then the third woman plays a lot of different people.
One of the things that I like about the way you write is that you ignore, rather than cross it, ignore gender and race in your casting. So a black man might be being played by a white woman, vice versa.
Sometimes it depends a lot on the production and the situation. So, for example, like what you're pointing to is what we did at Mount Auburn Cemetery. So we very specifically, when we did the nature plays, we wanted to cast across gender and race, and those sets of plays are about the natural world, but there's also a historical piece in there where, we had a woman playing Asa Gray and a Indian American man playing, or an Indian man playing Louis Agassiz's wife. So that was sending some important messages in that particular play about how it went. So I'm always trying to figure out, in some cases that doesn't make sense. So it really depends on the production, when you can do that and when you can't. Like in the American plays, we had to be more specific just because of the nature of the plays and how they're historically tied to things. Where in the nature play, that series starts out with people playing spotted salamanders. So we had a lot of imaginative room to play.
Salamander play. I did read that one, and I love that salamander play. And I do hope at the end the young salamander was able to read. We're left that wondering about that, which I thought.
I'm sure they were successful. I feel good about that one.
Now, one of the other things that, and of course, the first time we talked with you, it was about one of your novels, a historical novel, and we were talking, and that had very much to do, it was about the Civil War and a great hero of the Civil War, a black man. And one of the things that I have noticed is that when you write historical stuff, historical plays, you are not into hagiography. You're not making people look good. You show people struggling. You show them dealing with life. In one of the plays that I recently read is about a black slave who ultimately manages to get free, but he worked for the Hancock family.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Now we usually think, New England, Boston, Free State, all of this. And one of the things that you make very clear is not only was Cato a slave, but when he was supposed to be freed, the Hancocks weren't all that ready to let him go. It was like there's this sense of, you don't really count.
Right. Well, and yes, I think that is very true. Cato and Dolly ended up being a very interesting play to work on. And that's one that was written for a museum where we had an exhibit of the door from the original Hancock mansion. So 300-year-old door that was on display in an exhibit about unheard voices in American history tied to the Hancock household. So our charge was to write a play that centered around the door, but obviously had to be about people, but isn't just about John Hancock, the historic figure. And so how do you get away from that? And then so the play ended up being about Dolly Hancock, John Hancock's wife, who had a lot of struggles just as being a woman in colonial America. And then Cato Hancock, who was enslaved and then makes a choice to stay working as a servant in that household. And it highlights a whole bunch of things for visitors. And we did that show probably almost 300 times, which was pretty great. We had a lot of performances over 2 years, many thousands of people. So, which is fun about working museums and that kind of thing, where you can just get a lot of exposure and really impact people. But so what was interesting is to realize that, and this is just always eye-opening to me, is understanding kind of like how slavery worked in colonial America, and understanding that when we often think, in contemporary America, we think of slavery as really in kind of the pre-Civil War era in the South, plantation slavery, but really in colonial America, the thing to keep in mind is that there is nowhere free on the continent for a freed black to go. Like, there's not like if you were a slave, like you can't escape to free Canada because free Canada doesn't exist. There's no free anywhere in North America. So that means when you're free, you have to align yourself with columns of power. So he was working for the John Hancock's household, which is the most powerful household in New England at that time. So he made a choice. He's like, I am well protected if I keep working for these people.
Yeah. And that really, in my mind, that you capture, it's really important that you do capture these kinds of issues that are social and political and economic issues that underlie, as opposed to, sometimes I see things like the Broadway adaptations of American history. Like this summer, we have Hamilton coming out. And, it sounds so great, and people, but they're not learning real history. 1776 was another one. They're learning to sing songs.
Well, I don't want to knock either of those plays. I think they're both great. But
how much history people are learning from them, that's my thing.
Yeah, I think Hamilton is interesting in that he definitely has a really specific take on the Hamilton history and myth, and he's reframing some of it, but that also means parts of it get left behind. There's complexities around, I don't know, it's a really ambitious piece that he did, and musically it's amazing. But yeah, I think my approach to history is different, but also I'm not writing a play as big as he was.
Right.
But actually it's interesting. I'm hopefully working on a project soon in Boston where we will have a bit larger of a space, because most of these plays I work on are very intimate. So, for the Mount Auburn plays, we would see 35 or 40 people at a time if we were sold out, and we were sold out every night. And then Cato and Dolly, same thing. We could seat about 35. So it's really intensely close with the audience, and they're just right there.
Intimate theater.
Yes, it's very intimate theater.
Patrick, I really like that you look at things at a different perspective, because, there's so many things, let's say, about Hamilton, but nobody knows about his wife or anyone else that was in the household.
Yeah.
And I think people need to know history, real history, true history. And you do it in a learning way, but also an entertainment way. And hard to do.
I'm glad you think so.
Well, I definitely think. So what is this new venue? You said you're getting a bigger venue. What is the new one?
Yeah.
Well, I'm working a lot with Revolutionary Spaces, which runs an old state house where we did Blood on the Snow, which was a play about the day after the Boston Massacre, and was very, very successful for a few years.
We had talked about that one when you were on before, and that was another one I loved.
Yeah, that was a really great experience. Sadly, our production this year has had to be postponed indefinitely right now. But my hope is, I'm in talks with them right now about something at Old South Meeting House, which is a very different venue, just that there's a merger between those two organizations. So now Old South Meeting House is one where our company just commissioned another playwright, Miranda Descoget, who's a fabulous young player. She's writing a play about Crispus Attucks that will be staged at Old South Meeting House. And I'm hoping that I will also be doing a larger play, a full-length play on the order of Blood on the Snow in that space. And that's a space that can seat 300 people. Mm-hmm. So that's a whole different kind of thing where, Blood on the Snow, we could seat 56. Mm-hmm. So this is a different kind of space. It's a space that is, hence the name, Old South Meeting House. It's this is where the Boston Tea Party meeting started in 1773. So the crowd gathered there, and crowds have gathered there for many, many years as people are exercising their right to free speech and right to assemble. And so, will we end up making curious as to what we end up making for a big play there. But the Attucks play will kind of break the ground there. And I'm really excited to see what Miranda comes up with.
Are you going to write a play? I'm going to throw out my wish list, okay?
Okay.
One wish list is I'd love a play that's centered around Samuel Adams, one of the most fascinating characters. Of course, I'm a New Englander. I grew up. To me, I mean, there's very few people on earth more fascinating than Samuel Adams. And folks, it wasn't because he brewed beer.
No, it wasn't because he brewed beer. And it's funny that that picture on the Sam Adams brew beer is actually a Paul Revere because they thought Samuel Adams was too unattractive.
Oh, I didn't do that.
So, yeah, no, Samuel Adams is a really interesting guy. I mean, he shows up in Blood on the Snow, but in a pretty small role. Yeah, I think that set of people, Adams and Otis, are really, really interesting. And then you kind of toss. The Old State House did a piece about Prince Hall and Dr. Warren, Joseph Warren. But I think you look at Warren and Otis and Adams, there's a lot of richness there, and you never know what happens. I mean, there's a lot of sites in Boston that I'd love to write for, that's for sure.
And the other site, and the site I would love, although I don't know, you'd have to have everybody kind of scrunching down, is to do a site-specific at the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution.
Oh, that is high on my list. High on my list. I haven't chased it too hard. Yes. I mean, I'd want to have that's a tricky one to figure out, like, well, how big a budget would you want to have? Like, a lot of times these things have, if I'm lucky, like Blood on the Snow had 10 people and that felt really lucky. A lot of these things, like Cato and Dolly is 2 or whatever, but I think at the Constitution, it's so big, you'd want to have a big cast. Yeah,
but in order to get them moving around, you might have to use small people.
Yeah, if we did it down below, but if we did it on the deck, I think we'd be fine. Yeah, I wonder. I do have. I'm working with the National Park Service on a play right now, on a series of plays right now. I can't talk about yet, but after July, I'll be able to talk about that more, about a project that we're starting up, not related to the Constitution, but some other plays in Boston that that the talks are going well with that. So I think we'll see even more work coming out of our area. And then, it's nice that the Campobello thing kind of let me branch out of New England a little bit, at least to Canada. Because, I think I'm interested in working in other places as well. So it's kind of a matter of figuring out, what other kind of institutions or places lend themselves well to this and want to have me around.
Yeah, of course, the other part of it is, that you have an active home life and life in the Boston area, and to go off, say, to work in New Orleans for 6 months for staging.
Yeah.
Philadelphia would be great. New York has a lot of great historical, but I would be happy to go to New Orleans for a few months or let's say I could go down at least for a month or a few to work on a play down there. If anybody's looking, I'm definitely interested. I love New Orleans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I picked New Orleans deliberately because I could see you. I could see you, for some reason, Patrick, I can see you walking through the French Quarter with, I'm not sure whether you're holding a drink or a wonderful coffee and a beignet. The jazz and all of that. But because one of the things I really would love to see you do is a play about jazz and the jazz musicians. I'm feeding him all these ideas.
Well, there's so much you can put into that. According to what time period you'd be.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing, I think the work I've been doing lately. Yeah, New Orleans has such a rich history that goes way, way back. So, try and figure out, like, what era do you want to look at in New Orleans? I think you look at the start of the Jazz Age, be really exciting, but there's richness that goes back centuries. And so, and I've now, especially the Campobello piece, I feel like I've done pieces in a lot of different centuries, the 18th century, and then the Mount Auburn pieces are all over the place. Yeah. So I like a chance to get to experiment in different time periods. We're talking to a producer that's raising money for a film right now about John Clark, who was one of the founders of Rhode Island, along with Roger Williams. And John Clark was a Baptist reverend who was instrumental in establishing freedom of religion as one of the founding tenets of Rhode Island, far ahead of, this is in the 1600s, so far ahead of Thomas Jefferson, and really lays some of the groundwork that we see in our Constitution for the founding of Rhode Island. And so he's kind of underappreciated. And so there's actually a descendant of his who's currently raising money. Yeah, I'd never heard of him either.
This is what I love. I want to hear about the people that you know, everybody writes about George Washington and Jefferson and everyone, you know, there was so much more.
Yes. And they'll have such rich personal lives. I mean, in order to be that influential and in creating and making things happen in life, you have to have a certain richness to you. Mm-hmm. It might be the richness of your single-mindedness and obsession, but there's a richness there that makes these characters so worth knowing. And I love the fact you bring them to life. So what are you working on now? Beside all these plays.
Well, those are a lot of things I'm working on right now. Yeah, hopefully the Clark film gets funded, and then we'll work on that, which is just it'll be very challenging. I think when you go back that far, you know, finding out the right information and figuring out what it is a challenge. But Reza Clark, who would direct and produce, and I'd work with her on the script. I mean, she has some ideas about how to structure that. But I'm finishing up the Campobello piece right now, so I think that is pretty close to being in good shape. I'm working on a book about basically we're publishing the Mount Auburn scripts along with a lot of the production photos from the plays. It's going to be a beautiful playbook, along with some essays and some reflections from me and the cast and the director, just minor bits of text added to that. But I'm so excited about that. And that, I just saw the cover for it today, which looks great. And so the designers and I are working on that. So that's keeping me pretty busy. Yeah, and then working on putting my input into the Attics piece, and then hopefully this Old South Meeting House project, I think it's going to ramp up really fast. And so that's a whole big mystery as to what exactly that's going to be, which is exciting to get to have that freedom going in and saying, okay, we're going to make something that has a big impact. And my goal is to kind of understand, much like we did at Old State House, what's the right story for this piece, for this play at this time. So yeah, I am, even though we're in lockdown and Massachusetts getting hit pretty hard, I am as busy as I've been, even with the shows canceled. So I had to play Mox Knox, or Soon Comes the Night, I was supposed to be on tour with that right now. That had to be delayed a year. Blood on Snow has been delayed. I have another Mount Auburn Cemetery project that was scheduled for the end of August that I don't know if will happen or not. That is a kind of a cool play that you would really appreciate, as both of you, I think. This is a play it's called Abolitionists and the Moonlight Abolitionists, and it's about 6 abolitionists who are buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery, and it's kind of this swirling conversation between them that takes place as a concert reading, so at Music Stand, under the full moon at Washington Tower in the cemetery. So it's a play designed to be done in the dark, in the moonlight.
Well,
you can do that anywhere, right?
Patrick had sent me a copy of that.
Oh.
I did read it, and I don't want to inject too much of myself in here, but I have to tell you, when I went to boarding school up in Byfield, Massachusetts, and the school which was actually founded before the American Revolution.
Oh, wow.
And in our junior year in English, what we did was we read, except for one Shakespeare, which was Julius Caesar, with the reason being obvious why,
right,
was we read about the Civil War, hence the connection to Caesar. And we read things like, yes, the Red Badge of Courage, but we also read John Brown's Body, the Hugh Jackman poem, and things like that. And because we were being taught to see the Civil War in not only from the Northern point of view, but in kind of pretty much opposition to the great cause, being taught the Northern great cause, which is really underrepresented in American history. And now I'm reading your play just this past week, and I'm learning about some of these people who had funded John Brown's raid.
Right.
And their ambivalence about it, their fear of being caught in being told that they were, people finding out that they had been involved in that, the defense of themselves. And it really, I have to tell you, I mean, I hated the fact that it took me back, and I wanted to just shove it into that English teacher's face and say, hey, you should read this. But I loved what it did. I loved how it took something I had learned years and years ago and just expanded and enriched it so much. And so thank you.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Yeah, that was a hard piece to write, I think. Just the research, I wrote it as an extra piece. I wrote these 10 plays for an Albert Cemetery, and then I wanted to do one more experimental production in terms of style. And originally I was going to do a rainy day play that could only be done in the rain. But the production complexities of doing that and producing the 10 other plays were just too much. I gave up on it. I'll do it someday. But I said, well, why don't I do a moonlight play? I can at least predict when the moon will be full, and we can always find a rainy day place. So, But then I knew a little bit about Harriet Jacobs, but the others I really didn't know much about at all. And then getting to know them and trying to, and I obviously, because of my work with Robert Smalls and Steering to Freedom, I had spent some time at the Civil War before, but I hadn't spent as much time in the abolition movement. And so this play, even though it's not super long, took a lot of time just to kind of understand these people and get beyond what Ken, you're talking about, the Secret Six that funded, I had never really heard of them, and then you dive into them and you realize how human they are, and that they were afraid, and that it's easy to flatten even the Civil War and say, well, these people were brave and they did this or didn't have complicated motives, and then you get back to when you try to dramatize, it's like, oh, they have to be human, and they were human, and they were making complicated decisions, and they need to respect that as a dramatist, I think.
And underlying it too, Monica, I think you'll enjoy this part of it. Underlying all of the rest of it is the issue of women. And one of the things that I think has been underappreciated in America is that abolition of slavery really is a necessary precursor to the establishment of the women's right to vote. And even today, we're still talking about the things like the ERA, of the right of a woman to control her own body, which is a huge, huge one now.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. I think that women's suffrage always raises an interesting question, which is the more intrinsically difficult question in America, sexism or racism? And obviously they link together very closely in the women's suffrage movement, which is, I think, with the anniversary this year, which sadly so many events are being canceled because of the pandemic, and I think we're really not losing, just the moment of historical reflection that we were going to have around this anniversary commemoration, let's say, is unfortunate for many reasons. The pandemic is horrible for lots of reasons, but it's too bad that we're losing this moment, I think, a little bit, in that I think the people I've been talking to in the history side were really embracing the complexity of how the women's suffrage movement also had some really challenging racial issues going with it, where Black women were getting, pushed under the bus a lot.
And people don't know this. The only way they would find out is by people like you producing these type of plays and such, I just find it fascinating. I'm so glad you're doing this.
Yeah. And white women were being kind of ignored, although, we know of a few that really stood out. Of course, another aspect, and I have to say, the great wars of the 19th century one of the things that they did do in a positive sense, I mean, I hate to think of war as positive, but one of the things they did do in a positive sense was for the first time, they really gave women a heroicism that, you know, whether it was Florence Nightingale or whoever, you know, that like, yeah, Betsy Ross is sewing. Big whoop. I mean, these women
She
were
didn't
like,
even do that.
yeah, I know that. These women were out there actually dealing with the battles. They were nursing and that really again. I mean, the idea that war and women's rights are in this sense very much interwoven historically.
Right, and I think we see that very much in terms of the start of the 20th century about how World War I interacts with the suffrage movement, both positively and negatively. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, there's a huge defeat for the suffrage movement in 1918, and then they managed to come back, or prior to 1918. But you know, there's big marches around the country that, you know, it's a defeat for the suffrage movement. Especially locally in New England, they decide to stop trying to do it on a state basis and then go national, and that makes all the difference in the end. Yeah, there's a great exhibit on that at the Edward Kennedy Institute of the Senate here in Boston right now, which is a place I very much want to do a site-specific play at, by the way.
I bet.
Because,
makes me want to go to Boston. I don't
yeah.
Well, that. At least one in one of some of the Kennedy, you know, you mentioned the Edward Kennedy Center, but I would think you'd also like to do some Kennedy-oriented plays too.
Yeah, I mean, that material's been plumbed pretty well, I think, and is touchy, right? I think, but the Kennedy Institute, which is to the Senate, which is amazing, is they have a life-size replica of the Senate chamber. And so when you walk in, it's so real, and you can go in there and they have great presentations. They have a fabulous education program, and I've been talking with them for a few years trying to get the right project and the right funding lined up for that. But I want to do a piece there so badly. I was hoping to do a piece on Hiram Revels, who was the first black senator. But we haven't found the funding for it yet. But there's a whole lot of options there. And then a women's suffrage piece there would be pretty amazing too. So, you know, I keep hoping that we find the right donor to match up with them to make that project happen. But it's so cool because you could fit easily 100, 200 people in there, and then people could be at the Senate desks while things are happening in there. It's an amazing site.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds great. Well, we're about out of time, and folks, I want to remind you that Monica and I have been having the great pleasure of talking with Patrick Gabridge, who is a playwright from the Boston area, and his plays are primarily, not only at this point, performed there. He's got one coming up, hopefully in another year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It'll be off a year, up in Campobello Island, which is Canada, really right off the coast of Maine. And we've been talking with Patrick about a whole bunch of things. One last thing I do want to mention, folks, while you do have a book of your plays coming out soon, and you do have one wonderful novel, and I want to let you mention it.
Yeah, please. Steering to Freedom is available from your local bookstore or anywhere. Actually, I have 4 novels available. But Steering to Freedom is my historical novel about Robert Smalls.
Absolutely wonderful.
Well, thank you.
And I everybody should. I mean, this should be in schools. I'm sorry. We need to know facts.
Sure. Absolutely. When I was a kid, I was mentioning earlier, you know, that when I was a kid, what I was exposed to, one of the things that I was exposed to, and every kid in Massachusetts in those days read, I think it was in 6th grade, 7th grade, was Johnny Tremaine. And it's a historical novel about just set in the time of the Revolutionary War, the beginning of the war. And, you know, I thought it was a great book. It helped me to figure out who I was as an American. I think Steering to Freedom is a book that every youngster should read. I think every American youngster should read it, yes. But particularly I think that every American of African ancestry should particularly read it so they can see the dignity and the stature of this Black hero of the Civil War. And then every white Euro-American should read it so they can see that a Black man can have that kind of stature and impact. So I guess that means that pretty much everybody.
Yeah,
Yes,
everybody should read it.
The Navajo Nation, maybe I'll let you.
I think it is something. It's such a great adventure story, and you know, a positive story of community and family, and this man finding a way through the most difficult circumstances in a real positive way. I mean, he's not out killing people in the midst of a war. He's busy solving problems with his mind and his leadership. So I think it is something that I would think high schoolers would really be attracted to.
So, folks, thank you for joining us today. Patrick, thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, Patrick, you better come back.
Yes.
I'm happy to. Thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to come back.
It's always too short. Okay, take care, Patrick.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.